So hello, and thank you for joining us again this morning. So in our last session, Boone was telling us about the different things that we can do to control and refine our autonomic nervous system. And he talked about the top-down approach, which involves regulation of your emotional responses, but also a bottom-up approach, which involves having cold showers or intense exercise, brief bursts of HIIT exercise, for example, as well as breathing. And in this session, he's going to demonstrate to us how breathing controls your heart rate and how we as individuals can have conscious control on our heart rate and then our stress response and our autonomic health. And this is a very interesting demonstration. And what you can see on the screen here is some software that we partner with. So this is called HeartMath software, and it's an app on your phone or your computer that you can download. And then you have a sensor, and we're just going to show you a picture of Boone now, who is just attaching himself to the sensor. So it's like a small clip that goes on his ear, and then another clip that just goes on his top. And this is going to be measuring his heart rate. So just his heartbeat from second to second, and that's all. And so you can just see now he's putting that on, and we should be seeing his heart rate coming up at the top of this screen. Just at the top there, you can see a black line. And what that is just showing his heart rate going down and then up as he's breathing. And he's getting this prompt. And now this will be an app on his phone that he's looking at, telling him to breathe deeply in and breathe deeply out. And this is a mandala in the center, which is just showing, and it's prompting him to breathe in. And that's for about 5 seconds, and then a hold, and then breathe out for about 5 seconds and a hold. And it takes a couple of minutes to get into this. And as you can see, there are prompts on the screen saying things like focus on a positive or calm feeling. So at the same time as this regular breathing in for 5 seconds and hold, and out for 5 seconds and hold, he's thinking some sort of positive emotion, as we were talking about in the last session, whether that's gratitude or kindness or compassion, or thinking of a person or an object or something very dear to him. And he's just letting that happen. So he's breathing and he's thinking positive thoughts. And if you look at the top of the screen, so the black line, and that is essentially just tracing his heartbeat. And his heartbeat is getting faster and it's getting slower. And it's getting faster as he's breathing in, and it's getting slower as he's breathing out, which is what we do all the time. But because he's breathing slowly, we can see that. And you can see it following a very nice pattern, which can be called a sine wave, which is a very regular sort of S-shaped pattern going in and out. And that's his heart responding to his breathing and these positive thoughts. And he's going to be doing that for about 5 or 10 minutes. And he's again just breathing in and breathing out. And he's not thinking too much about what I'm saying. He's thinking about these positive thoughts. And you can see that his heart rate is obeying his breathing. It's going up as he's breathing in, and it's going down and he's breathing out.
And as well, when he's breathing in, he's breathing in through his nose. Yeah. And then he's breathing out through his mouth. You can't quite see it on the screen, but that's the sort of pattern he's using. So in through his nose and out through his mouth.
Yeah.
And also to say that pacer, that mandala in a minute, that can be varied from patient to patient. So depending on your makeup, you may be breathing in and out for longer periods or shorter periods. So
yes,
that's just how it's set today.
Yes, you can adjust it according to what's useful for you. So normally we breathe in and out very quickly. I think recommended is 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out, or 5 to 6 to 7. And you can adjust that according to your practice. Now, you'll see on there was just a statement on the screen there saying, excellent, you're in high coherence. What is coherence? Well, coherence is, interestingly, all this is a measure of his heart rate going in and out, and it's going up and down. But you can actually perform quite high level scientific analysis of that heart rate, and you can break down different bits and look at different energies and all sorts. So you get mathematical modelers looking at this and performing programs and everything. And they can work out the components of that heart rate, that is from the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest, and the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight. And those two different arms of the autonomic nervous system are constantly like a yin and yang. They're working together, in and out. And when you're in coherence is the point at which you can get them exactly aligned. So most of the time you'll have a predominance, us in normal life might have a predominance of our sympathetic activity because we're rushing around, we're a bit stressed, we're checking emails. When you're sleeping or in deep meditation, you might be in a parasympathetic nervous system, but getting coherence is when they're perfectly aligned. And we know that that can happen with practice when you're breathing around 6 breaths per minute. And you're in this state of positive mindset, and we can measure coherence using this scientific analysis that you can see on the bottom right. It's called a spectral analysis of the frequencies of the waveforms of the heart rate. And when you're in a coherent state, as you can see Boone's level there in the red, blue and green is just a marker of how coherent he is. It's a scientific equation. The numbers themselves don't matter as much as the fact that you can just see he's got this heart rate going very high up to 90 and then very low down to 65, and it's just very smooth, very regular. And when you're in this level of coherence, all of your systems in your body start to align in perfect function. So that's your gut, your breath, your heart rate, but also things like your hormones and your endocrine system. And so this is a very healthy state for your body to be in. And if you can practice this and getting into this coherent state a couple of times a day, this is what we were talking about in the previous sessions of just aligning your body and aligning your systems to kind of sharpen the balance between them. Trish, is there anything else to say?
Yeah, in terms of how you can whether you, I think sometimes there's a question, well, how do you feel? Do you feel the benefit of that balance? Would you feel the difference whether you were in the red or the blue or the green? And I think we've all found that with that coherence that Boone is in at the moment, in that green feeling, that afterwards you can think about how do you feel in yourself. So how relaxed do you feel, or how do you feel literally emotionally, how do you feel, and more rested. And I think sometimes people do, and I certainly do, you feel that difference in terms of how you feel after whether you're in coherence, because than not. So even though we talked about longer term benefits and changes, I think that feeling of being in coherence and not is something that you can experience if you do this in your practice.
Yes, and when you learn to recognize that emotion, it's such and that feeling, the physical feeling, it's such a positive feeling that you become more aware of your body's senses. And yeah, as you pointed out, the circle at the top of the screen that's in green is just a suggestion to you as you're doing your practice that you're in a higher level of coherence. The blue is in a medium level of coherence, and the red is a low level of coherence. And during any exercise, you might go between the different levels, but you can see Boone is predominantly in this high level. And I don't know about you, Trish, but he's clearly been practicing much more than me, because my coherence level.
I think so. But it's not competitive of that. But sometimes it's very common when you first start that you don't always, you don't immediately go to the green. It can take you some time. It just takes practice.
Absolutely.
To focus on your breathing, and to, as you said, not to be, sometimes the phone might go or something may happen, and you notice that you might dip into the blue, into the red quite quickly when that happens. So I think what we're seeing with Boone is somebody that has practiced this, but the technique is there. The technique is what you're seeing is breath in through his nose, out through his mouth, and that sort of, you can see the change in the heart rate and that the consistency there as you do that.
And actually, I don't know if they're showing, if we can see Boone at the moment, but actually his eyes are closed. And so you don't actually have to look at the screen. And one of the keys is actually not to get too fixed up on the numbers. because I find the minute I start worrying about my coherence level, it goes to the bottom. So the key is to sort of be thinking about it and using the breath pacer as a guide, but not obsessing over it. But you can see in that pattern in the top of his heart rate, just going all the way up to 95 and now to 70, is he's now got this in a very smooth level. So his body, you can feel it almost, all of the systems just aligning to be working properly. Now, the other thing is, if all of these charts are a bit stressful, which they can be, you can upload, and again, on the app, there are different beautiful pictures that you can have that if they mean something to you. And so this actually is a beautiful lily. There was a gift to Boone and his wife, that a large and beautiful smelling bunch of flowers that brought them great joy. And so he often looks at this as he meditates, as he does his breathing exercises, and this can be good for him. But again, similarly, you can do it for a child or a pet or something that brings you deep feelings of gratitude. And again, you'll learn to recognize your bodily sensations and your emotional senses when you think certain thoughts, and the thoughts that work for you for your physical health and those that don't.
Yeah, it's just a tool, isn't it? So for some people, especially when you first start, the pacer in whatever form, and there's various ways that you could, I mean, as you can see on this screen at the moment, you've got right at the top, under the graph, you've got that ball which is going from side to side. So that might be something that just helps you know when you're taking five seconds in, or 6 seconds in, or 4 seconds, whatever your optimum is. But other people like the pacer, like the change in colors, they find that relaxing. So this is just a tool to help you. But equally, you could just find yourself on the bus and close your eyes or look out to the window and just do counting for 5 or counting for 4.
Yeah.
Counting for 5 and count out for 5. So they're just tools. I mean, the charts, as you said, sometimes it's useful for us to have a look at if you want to be a little bit more analytical. But the focus is just practice the breathing. That's the most important thing.
Yes, and incorporate it into your day as much as possible. So, for example, if you're about to go for that interview, maybe take 5 breaths in and out, and you'll find yourself a bit calmer. So, what we might ask to do now, so you can see that Boone has got himself into this sort of deep state of coherence, but we might try and distract him now and get him to talk. And if you have a look at his waveform, so look at the heart rate and the level of coherence, and we might see that when we distract him from this state of coherence and breathing and gratitude and compassionate thinking, his coherence and his heart rate will change. And that's something that, again, is very expected. So if your phone goes off or a child walks into the room, it's perfectly normal and appropriate to be distracted, and it's nothing too much to get despondent about. So Boone, welcome back to the world.
Thank you. I almost didn't want to come back. It's a very, very positive feeling I have now. And thank you for allowing me to practice that for 10 minutes. I just remembered how important it is to practice in this mindful way, because I've been doing this for approximately 9 to 10 months. And Mel and Trish, I think we did the heart math course together, and we had all the kit delivered to us. And one of the things that I have in my day-to-day practice is that I've come off using this app once I got comfortable with breathing, because what I chose is a particular classical piece that has a coherence timer in that every 4 bars of that piece would signify an 7 or 8 second breath in, which is where I'm comfortable at. Of course, as Mel said, it is also or it is recommended that you start with a low breath rate, something like 5 or 4 seconds. And then as you build up to 6 seconds or thereabouts, I think that would be the optimal breathing cycle. That means 6 seconds in and 6 seconds out. But as Trish said, this is a tool. There's nothing to stop you practicing this yourself without this tool, because this is the most powerful way to use it. You don't always have to put this thing on your ear to achieve coherence. In fact, Navy SEALs, before they engage in combat, do a particular form of breathing called box breathing, which is a 4 second in, 4 second hold, 4 second out box breath for about a minute before they engage. And this gives them a very high level of calm and concentration and non-distractibility, because they're down-regulating the fight or flight immediately before they need it. And so this breathing technique can be equivalently used for you, and I have used it too, Mel, in my cath lab, for example, when things are getting slightly out of hand. For example, a patient's becoming agitated in front of me. I often come back to my breath, and somehow miraculously the control that I have in the lab in terms of directing traffic or explaining to everyone what individuals' role are in the context of an acute emergency where the brown stuff is hitting the fan. It's amazing how 1 minute of breathing and going within can really get you out of jail. And so I've used this so many times since learning this technique, but also in day-to-day practice, I actually commute to work still. And on the train, right now in COVID times, I'm able to get a seat all the time. I'm just sitting there without this, but with my music in my ear and practicing coherence. If I'm not reading a book or a paper, I'm sitting down with my eyes closed and just in my own world. And you can see how just in the 10 minutes that I've done this, how my coherence level was somewhere between, let's say, 4 and 7, about 6, I think, is the average. And since I started speaking, you can see it's just dropped down, and you can see my heart rate pattern is varying a lot more erratically rather than the sinusoidal pattern that you saw much earlier on. And at the end of this, I'm just going to show you how quickly, well, no pressure, Boone, but how quickly we can come back to a coherent state just with a 1 minute breathing cycle. And I'm going to try and demonstrate that at the end. So the key points are, this is a tool. It is an inner balance tool from HeartMath, which you can purchase. We'll show you the link in a short while to get a 10% discount if you want to, and it will help support the Stop Fainting charity. It is something that you can practice at any time of the day, even without the tool. And let me go ahead and demonstrate that to you now, okay? So I'm going to stop talking in a short while, and when the black bar hits the right side, I'm going to take a breath out.
So now if you just look at the heart rate, the trace at the top of saying HRV, which is just the heart rate, you'll see that it's gone quite jagged, whereas before it was a nice S-shaped sinusoidal curve. But immediately, he's now been breathing for about 10 seconds, it's gone back to that beautiful symmetrical regular sine wave. And that's obviously, this is something that Boone has been practicing on, so he's very, very good at this. It would take me a little bit longer, I would think, to get into that state. But as Trish said, this is never a competition, and there's no point in really comparing yourself to anyone else, but it's more useful for you to just look at your own responses over time and to refine yourself. And it's interesting what Boone was saying, that he's found a piece of classical music that works for him. Again, we would kind of say, do that. So even if you go onto the internet or to YouTube, you can find breath pacers that might work for you and something beautiful to look at. And you can find your own way of practicing this that works for you.
I think, Mel, as well, I mean, we're all used intuitively to be told, you know, in a moment of stress or when something's happening, does like, you know, stop, take a breath. You know, it's something we say to each other all the time, isn't it? Take a breath, think clearly, because you're not thinking clearly, and just focus on things. What this, I think, software does is show you the inner workings of the autonomic system. So it's something intuitively we may know, or we may sometimes find it harder to do at certain times. But I think what the software does for us is just it shines a light and makes it visible of other things that we talk about on a more regular basis and in other videos.
Absolutely. And it's just fascinating that something as, you know, we have all the fanciest technology and medications in the world, but actually this is the most simple and basic tool that we have in our own bodies. We all have it, and we all possess this ability to control our stress in this way. And I think, and obviously the software is great for just demonstrating that to us, because sometimes, you know, when somebody says take a breath, it sounds so simple that you think it can't possibly work. You want an expensive medicine or something, but actually this is the most effective. And then there are lots of other things that we might talk about in other sessions. So sports that can involve deep breathing exercises, so things like yoga, Tai Chi, Pilates, anything that regulates, or even mindful running, or anything that's just where you're concentrating on your breath and your thoughts and you're adopting different postures.
So I would just like to make a secondary point. So the breathing coupled with thought would be a form of bottom-up approach with the breath coupled with the top-down approach. And I think that's particularly powerful. I have started to become a believer in yoga. Full disclosure, I've never done yoga, but my brother is a yoga instructor, and I've seen a transformation in him and in his clarity of thought processes. But what I would share now is that I injured my back in medical school, and for 4 months of my life in the fourth year in med school, I had to skip lessons, and I thought that was the end of my career. And one day, on the morning of my planned back surgery, I had a phone call from the hospital to say we were in a winter crisis mode. So I never went into surgery. And instead of doing that, I took up Tai Chi, and uh, I became proficient enough to set up a Tai Chi instructor, or to become a Tai Chi instructor in a course that I ran in Cambridge, where I was practicing as a house officer then, for staff members, which was very successfully and very warmly received. And at that point, what I now realize in retrospect, having not known about these breathing techniques then, which was in 1999, I think, was that what Tai Chi and Qigong and yoga and Pilates all do is that they couple a posture with a breath and a thought. Now, this triad of autonomic influences, I think, are particularly strong. And so today we focus on thought, positive emotions, as well as breath. But I'd like you to bring in the third component, which is posture. And in yoga, the postures or the actions or movements are called asanas. The breath or breath work could be prana, or pulling in prana, or life force, or chi. And I think it's all these ancient traditions have very similar components of exercise. And I think if you look at a 2,000-year-old tradition, which has spanned and has been tested for centuries and still proven to be one of the most widely practiced exercises across the world, perhaps not in the West, but certainly where the vast population of the world reside, that there is some truth in the ancient wisdom. And so in my personal experience, the back healing that I eventually had, which I would say was almost complete, despite a very strong lumbar 4-5 prolapse causing sciatica, was done by a combination of my posture in Tai Chi and breathing or breath work, and also the intention to heal. So my mindfulness. And I think now, knowing now what I now know about these things, I would say that the power of healing from within is pretty strong. And this healing is very difficult to quantify, subconscious healing. But when we think about autonomic nervous system disorders, we think about the brain, in particular the subconscious brain, being the dominant force that exacerbates all the problems that we have, and therefore the kind of healing that we can provide from this triad of techniques can be incredibly helpful. So I'm going to stop there. I was just going to try and pull out the slide which shows the autonomic effects of stress, Mel. So let me just stop sharing my screen. I pulled it out whilst both of you speak.
Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing that, Boone. That's very, very powerful. And again, it shows that actually by using posture and your intention to heal and your Tai Chi, so your kind of the combination of your heart rate and your exercise, actually you avoided an invasive operation.
Exactly.
That's very, again, we're just going back to the fact that these are such simple things, and they're so simple that we can be tempted to overlook them. And yet in actual fact, they were possibly even more healing than an operation. And the other thing that we haven't mentioned is this concept that we've mentioned a little bit, is this thing called heart rate variability. So the ability of your heart rate to go from, we were seeing Boone's going from 50 up to 60 up to 95. So it can go high and it can go very low and it can go high. And the ability of your brain and your body to switch it and to kind of smoothly make it transition from going high to low is a marker of autonomic health. But we also know that it's a marker of things like longevity. So if, for patients in hospital, if they've got a high heart rate variability, so if their heart rate can go from high to low, they tend to do much better after various different illnesses. For example, people have had a heart attack. And we know that if you've got a low heart rate variability, so if it goes from, say, 60 to 62 to 59, it tends to be associated with worse health outcomes. So again, this is just another marker that we know, we call it a biomarker, something that we can measure that's associated with better health is your heart rate variability, is your ability for your heart rate to go up and down. And that's very well established in medical studies and medical science.
So I've now found the slide that I wanted to share with you. This was a talk that I was giving to some GPs last week. And the title of the talk was actually Autonomic Dysfunction in Long COVID. And it's a topic that's very close to all three of us, our hearts, because Mel wrote an article on long COVID published on the 1st of January as a senior author. And I'll share that article with you in a short while. But in this talk, I give a historical perspective. And actually, did you know, Mel, that the syndrome of autonomic dysfunction, or POTS, was initially described in the American Civil War in the 1800s by this chap, Jacob Mendes da Costa, who saw in returning soldiers from the Civil War, even those who did not see battle action, and even those with no apparent injury, but were sitting on the sidelines, waiting nervously for action to start. Those soldiers developed these kind of symptoms called the soldier's heart, or what he called the irritable heart syndrome, later on known as POTS. And, the common trigger at that time was the extreme stress of war. But now we know other predisposing factors. So let me skip through that, because this is the slide that I really want to show you, which is the impact of chronic stress. So when I say stress, I mean chronic stress now. And if you think about all the symptoms that may manifest from a heightened degree of adrenaline and cortisol from a chronic perspective, this is what it can do to your head, with issues with mood, anger, depression, irritability, lack of energy, which is also known as fatigue, which is a very common feature of a lot of our patients, anxiety, concentration problems, also known as brain fog. And these are the impact of stress. In the heart, increased heart rate, also known as palpitations. So I'm just picking out the common traits that we see in the group of our patients. Intestines, and we talked about increased intestinal transit earlier on with diarrhea, but it can also slow down the heart, slow down the gut movement, so it can cause constipation or diarrhea. Both of this can be caused. It can cause problems with sexual function, reducing sexual drive. It can cause problems with inflammation and joints, in your joints and your aches and pains. And this is the chronic pain syndrome that we sometimes see. And so what I'm trying to illustrate here, and then here, immune system. So people who typically have POTS or chronic stress have an increased susceptibility to immune system function or immune dysfunction. And then increased problems with stomach. So these are IBS-like symptoms or reflux, again, very common, and skin problems, very common with eczema and psoriasis. So let me ask you, Mel, if this is the impact of chronic stress on the body, what is the opposite of stress?
Well, there you go. It's well-being, and it's the opposite, a positive emotion. Perhaps we were talking about high coherence. And I just think it's so powerful that we all talk about stress all the time in 2021, but actually to think that stress might be not allowing us to absorb our nutrients that we're eating, or to be predisposing us to diabetes. This is a real sort of public health imperative, isn't it, for us to learn how to improve our well-being and to get the opposite of stress, which is vitality and energy and everything else.
So and yet, Mel, this is not the narrative that most doctors or most units in healthcare services think about perhaps with the exception of a mind-like charity or a psychological stress focus charity, but even they sometimes don't connect the dots, because there is an imperative, as you say, to connect the physical with the emotional. And without the emotional stability and without the stress, tackling stress head on and understanding the manifest effects of stress on the physical symptoms, you're always going to be chasing the end product. So for example, you're going to see a dermatologist for this eczema. You're going to have lots of creams and maybe steroids. You are going to see a gastroenterologist for the IBS, who is going to do an scope, top and tail. You might see an immune specialist or a hematologist or rheumatologist to deal with your chronic pain. And you might see a cardiologist here, like me, to deal with your palpitations. And you might see a specialist in chronic fatigue to deal with this. But actually, if you think about the holistic approach here, what patients should do first and foremost is understand that actually they should come more central. They should look at their own bodies and how they can heal themselves with the simple techniques that we explained earlier on. Because I think this is it's going to be, in my opinion, one of the most powerful self-healing emotional regulation exercises that society has seen in a long time, given the COVID state that we find ourselves in, the reduced access to resources. People are going to look online, and I do hope this webinar that we're doing now will start to be shared with more and more people, because when people take control of their own health and well-being, and importantly, have an expectation of recovery anchored by a true recovery. So when they see an improvement in the palpitations, in the gut, in the constipation, in their immunity strengthening and their improved sleep patterns, they will know that they're doing the right thing. And then we transition from a society of illness to a society of health. And actually, when you express those three things, love, compassion, gratitude, you will realize that the focus of our society should not be inward, i.e. looking after ourselves, which we ought to do, but should be outward, which is looking after our family, our friends and neighbors. And when that transition occurs, the whole of society can evolve and elevate to a very healthy society, which has each other's back at heart rather than your own back. Because you transition from being reactive, which is a very sympathetic type state, to being very proactive, where you're wanting to heal yourself and the world around you. And boy, is there much healing to be had in the world on the 21st of February, 2021. Isn't that, Mel?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for Boon and Trish for this really powerful session. And thank you very much for joining us and listening to us. And if you've got any questions, please reach out to us on the Stop Fainting website, and we'd love to hear from you. Bye.
Bye.